Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I want to start by building on some of the policy innovations that Dr. Braden has discussed in the previous presentation on the technical and modeling side and the integration of economics and biophysical models, and then discuss very, very briefly how these models work and then how we can use them in a policy context. So I think the wide range of policies that Dr. Braden has discussed in the previous presentation give you a good idea that this is not your grandparents' world anymore when it comes to conservation and environmental quality. We now have a variety of environmental goals that go well beyond water quality and water quantity, and we have a variety of levels of governance in the United States alone that go from the local to the regional, to the state, watershed, to the federal, and a wide variety of economic and command and control type tools that can be used. So we have all these policies, all these goals. How do we make sure that we're doing a good job, given that some activities will provide several benefits at once and others will have trade-offs? If we don't integrate all these coexisting policies, we really run the risk of having unintended consequences. So just to give you an idea of where we are on one of the old programs of the federal farm bill, the CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, started focusing on erosion. That N3 that is now that is there in the latest sign-up sheet, still there, but now erosion is only one of the components that matter. Carbon is the latest recently added element to the decision-making tool that's called the Environmental Benefit Index that is used to target land for CRP enrollment. So we have this very complex tools that we use because we have several goals, and some of these tools that we have provide more than one benefit at once. Here we look at a sister program to the CRP, the WRP, which has been reinvented in the 2014 Farm Bill, and the WRP, the Wetland Reserve Program, provides a variety of benefits. This paper that was published in 2010 estimates the amount of these benefits and quantifies them in monetary terms. And I would like to point out that when we talk about waterfowl recreation, the paper only estimates the benefits associated with hunting. There's other benefits such as bird watching access that are not quantified, and certainly there may be other benefits in terms of habitat that are not in here. So you can see that we have a policy that is certainly important for a non-point source pollution control that provides also greenhouse gas mitigation benefits. On the other hand, as Dr. Braden introduced in the idea in the previous slides, we have policies such as our biofuel policy that have increased corn area on, in part to mitigate greenhouse gas emission and substitute fossil fuel emissions, and these have resulted in increases in nitrogen and phosphorus loads. And this is from a paper we published in 2010 that shows essentially the higher the corn area, the higher the loads. And this is a classic example of non-point source pollution being exacerbated by another policy for another environmental goal as an unintended consequence. So how do we try and look more holistically at these problems, given that we have all these possibly competing, possibly synergistic issues? One of the ways we do it, thanks in part to the bettering of technology, is we use techniques to assess baseline land uses and management. We run these through biophysical models, and we obtain baseline environmental outcomes. So we have the current land use, we run it through, say, a surface water quality model, and we obtain information on the effects that this land use and management has on water quality indicators, be it sediment or nitrogen or phosphorus, pesticides, and so on. We then can do scenario analysis. So starting with those policy tools that Dr. Braden has talked about, we can develop economic models that tell us what's going to happen if we introduce the policy, run them through the land use and management, and we can then follow up with the biophysical models again in the scenarios. So we obtain environmental outcomes through the economic models, and the difference between the baseline land use and management profits or net returns or impacts on participants, we can look at the net benefits of these new policies to society. So these are integrated complex models that are becoming more and more common because we have more and more complex questions to answer. How do they work? Well, they tend to couple economic and biophysical models. In some cases now we're coupling biophysical and biophysical models. So we'll run something through a water quality model and then through a carbon sequestration model or a life cycle analysis model to look simultaneously at the impact on water quality and the impact on carbon sequestration. They depend heavily on new technologies that help us understand what's happening on the activity side, though there is still uncertainty on the discharge and delivery side. So some of these models are stochastic in nature and include uncertainty, though they help us bind the uncertainty. So the role of the models is essentially to help us understand the impact of activities and practices and outcomes and performance in terms of water quality, water quantity, groundwater, surface water, and so on and so forth. Or going further, things like habitat and wildlife populations. Typically, they use some type of GIS or spatially explicit data. Right now, for example, we can use some of these to assess tillage level, link them to economic models of tillage adoption, and we can look at both sediment and carbon impacts. We could use these to monitor how cover crops are doing and taking up nutrients. So we can do some pretty fantastic things. I want to point out, and we'll bring this up again, several people in the farming community particularly have privacy concerns. There are ways as researchers that we use to preserve confidentiality of the participants or to preserve anonymity, so the way we report the results can be modified to protect the privacy of the farmers. So the models can integrate across several things. Across environmental issues, for example, I'm working now on a project where we're linking a surface and a groundwater model, and we're running the same scenario, the same landscape through the surface water quality model, the groundwater model, and an economic model. They can also be used to look at how a carbon policy is affecting things like nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide, which are local water quality pollutants. We can also use these models, and this is very pertinent to the discussion we're having here today, to look at point versus non-point. And so this would mean that we look at models that assess the benefits of using non-point source pollution control via cap and trade, via taxes, via whatever tools that Dr. Braden has discussed in the previous slides, versus targeting point sources. And so green infrastructure, gray infrastructure, which has the best performance. We can use the same type of models to compare carbon sequestration techniques. Should we promote forest conservation and afforestation, or carbon sequestration, carbon storage and sequestration underground? And we can do this in dynamic ways, so we can look at long-term versus short-term impacts, and we can run scenario analysis if there is uncertainty. These models also help us because these days, as we've seen, there is a variety of entities, both geographically speaking and in terms of whether they're public, private, or non-for-profit, that have different interests and different environmental goals. So I think a good example of this is how Ducks Unlimited is now entering the carbon market and participating in wetland banking. Their primary mission is still to protect birds, but they can do a better job when they incorporate the revenue from a carbon credit scheme and the participation in a wetland banking scheme. So we are doing a better job at appropriating all the benefits of environmental protection, and so we potentially can increase the level of environmental protection. So the last thing I want to talk about is why these innovations matter from a policy perspective and how we can use them in the context of specific policies. As Dr. Braden said in the previous presentation, the Farm Bill is reorienting itself away from land retirement and into working land programs. There are severe budgetary concerns at the federal and state level. We're both from the state of Illinois. We know a lot about budget concerns here these days. So we need to go towards more cost-effective policies. We either want to achieve a certain result and minimize the cost of that result, or we want to maximize the outcomes of a given budget. And really, we can do that only if we work together, economists and biophysical environmental analysts, and look at the impact on the environment and the costs of the program at the same time. And we need to do this at a large scale, potentially overlapping different scales, different programs, because, as I said, otherwise we really run the risk of unintended consequences and waste of scarce and now more scarce public funds, or private funds or private donation. It doesn't matter who is paying, but we should use our money effectively. The next slide is pretty much repeating what I said in terms of the variety of issues that we have to address. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about two types of policy uses. We can use these models, these technical innovations, to assess programs ex ante. So before they're implemented, are they a good idea? Should we go forward with them, or are there better ways to get what we want? And so this slide shows an integrated bioeconomic model that was looking at targeting land retirement across space. And you can see that it's geographically explicit, it has explicit parcels, and the authors here figure out where we should be prioritizing expenditures. But we can also use them ex post, after a program has been implemented. This is becoming more and more important because we cannot really change the policies in an effective way if we do not understand whether it's been working or not. A very good example of this use of these technical advances is the SEEP project, the Conservation Effectiveness Assessment Program that was administered by the United States Department of Agriculture at the national level and in several watersheds to determine what were the environmental benefits of conservation programs in the Farm Bill. And in fact, the WRP study that I showed you at the beginning that looked at the lower Mississippi River Basin was part of the SEEP project. So that was a local, regional component of the project. Here you see a map that illustrates the breadth of the area that was covered by this project. And the way the project worked, just like in the slide I showed you before, it estimated a baseline of land use and costs using the National Resources Inventory constructed the scenario assuming that the Farm Bill practices, subsidized practices weren't there, and then compared the two scenarios. So this is really important for program assessment when, especially when funding is scarce. So I want to conclude with the same issue that Dr. Braden brought up at the end of his talk. It's important nowadays when there's a lot of attention paid in Washington and beyond, in places like Australia, Europe, Canada, attention is paid to carbon. We need to make sure that our carbon policies do not cause more non-point source pollution issues. Carbon policies are not conservation policies. They are not non-point source pollution control policies. We've seen the example of ethanol. Another really good example is from a paper that was published in Science in 2005 that essentially illustrated the fact that using land-based carbon sequestration via afforestation in some parts of the world could cause water quantity constraints and therefore have unintended consequences that way. So in conclusion, it's becoming more important as we value a broader spectrum of environmental goals, or as we better understand ecosystem services and the services that come from nature. It's becoming more and more important that we have policy actionable science, that we consider multiple environmental issues and policies simultaneously. And this is, again, if we have new partnerships across geographies and across sectors, becomes crucial. And I want to finish by not sugarcoating the fact that this is a challenging process, and we have just started doing this in the last 20, 30 years. There's still a lot of uncertainty. It's not clear how we assess the uncertainty when we compound uncertainty across models. There is long-term future temporal issues that need to be addressed, and there are privacy concerns. And the last thing I want to say is we cannot do that. We cannot do this without good monitoring. Good data is the basis for good modeling. And I know it's boring for people to talk about the importance of monitoring, but I think in the United States we can do a better job creating the databases of data we need on the land use side, on the management side, but on the water quality, carbon, habitat side as well, so that we can improve the effectiveness of our policy. Thank you very much.